Okay, so this isn't something I do very often, but yesterday I saw a movie that was so crazy and so awful in so many ways that I knew I would have to sit down and just spew some thoughts about it to my YouTube audience. The film in question was a Mark Wahlberg action thriller by the name of Flight Risk. I went to see this with a couple of friends yesterday. It was not our first choice. We actually really wanted to see Better Man, the Robbie Williams monkey movie, I guess because we thought it would be funny since Americans don't really know who Robbie Williams is, and also it's weird that they decided to make him a monkey for it. But we looked it up and found that it actually wasn't showing anywhere near us anymore. I think it's doing so badly at the American box office that they basically have pulled it from theaters. And then my second choice was the new Pedro Almodovar movie, The Room Next Door. I love Almodovar. I was really excited to see that one, but one of my friends couldn't make any of the showtimes. So instead, we were like, what else is at the theater? And realized that for some reason we all were down to see Flight Risk. We had seen the trailer for it when seeing another movie recently, and we all thought it looked really, really bad. And I'm not always able to convince my friends to see bad movies with me, but I think they were convinced because I thought maybe it would be similar to The Beekeeper, which we all saw last year and loved.
To be or not to be? Isn't that the bloody question? I think I'll take to be.
And I do have to say, based on the selection of trailers that played before Flight Risk, it does seem like there's this entire world of obscure action movies playing in theaters that I think don't really get into the mainstream conversation, but are apparently making money because there's tons of them. They make more of them every year. I had this friend back in London who's a big fan of Jason Statham action movies, and I feel like I was always having this experience with her where she would bring up some movie to me that she loved, and I'd look it up, and it came out in 2017 and made $200 million at the box office, and somehow I had never heard of it. In fact, during the trailers before the movie, I leaned over to my friend at one point and I was like, I feel like we've entered an alternate universe where this is what all movies are.
When my wife passed and I left the Royal Marines, a lot of people would have given up on me. You gave me a job.
I'm just a regular guy with a regular job, but I've got this condition where I don't feel pain.
To stop the assassin, you must become the assassin.
But anyway, we finally did see Flight Risk, and there's just a lot to unpack, I feel. So today I'd like to just off the cuff give you kind of an unscripted overview of all the things in this movie that I feel like are worth talking about. Like I said, this will be unscripted, but I did make some notes yesterday right after seeing the movie of just all the funniest, weirdest, or worst things I could remember about the movie, and I've organized them into categories, general categories, so I'll try and work off that. This movie just came out, so I'm gonna try and find a copy of it online, but if it turns out to be a crappy cam rip, or if I'm only able to use footage from the trailer, know that I did try. I guess maybe I should give an overview of the plot. This is, like I said, an action thriller of sorts, although honestly, there's not a lot of action or thrills, but it's kind of a bottle story taking place almost entirely in a small plane. We've got a US Marshal played by the lady from Downton Abbey who is transporting a key witness who was an accessory to some mob crimes, I think. It's all very vague in the movie. That guy is played by Topher Grace, so she's got him in handcuffs in the back of the plane, and they've arranged this transport. They're in Alaska, so they need to get back to a large city so that they can get to this guy's trial. They have hired Mark Wahlberg to transport them to Anchorage, Alaska in his little plane. But early on in the movie, and this isn't a spoiler because they reveal it in the trailer, it's the whole premise of the movie, they realize that Mark Wahlberg is not who he says he is. He's actually an evil bad guy who has killed and replaced the actual pilot of the plane. And I don't know, he has some dastardly plans for Michelle Dockery and Topher Grace. So you've got this thriller setup of, oh no, there's a bad guy flying the plane. Can we incapacitate the bad guy flying the plane? Even if we do, then we've got to fly the plane. There's some dramatic potential there. But here we go. My first category of notes is effects. To be fair, I'm not even typically someone who cares that much about effects in movies. Like, sometimes I'll go to see a movie with someone and afterwards they'll be like, oh, did you notice how bad the CGI was? And I'll be like, honestly, no, I did not notice that. Truthfully, it has to be pretty bad for me to care that much, or it has to be like really at the forefront of the movie for me to notice bad effects. And let's just say this movie is both. CGI was part of it. This is less of a problem for me because there's not that much kooky CGI in the movie. But in the opening scene, Topher Grace is in this motel room. He's like hiding out from the police and he hears a noise outside. So he goes to the window and there's like a fake out jump scare where a moose is in front of his window. And of course, it's a CGI moose. And it looks so bad. It looks like something out of a video game. So the CGI moose was maybe the first laugh out loud moment of the movie, but like I said, it's really not even CGI that's the main effects issue in this movie. Actually, the worst, most noticeable effects in the movie are practical, and I do applaud any movie that uses practical effects, although this one is weird for a lot of reasons. I'm not even talking about big set piece practical effects like big gore type things. It's really just very basic, minor practical wound makeup and stuff like that. Actually, probably the biggest, most glaring effects issue in the movie is Mark Wahlberg's bald cap. You may be aware of this already, even if you've just seen the trailer for Flight Risk. He's in a bald cap for most of the movie, and it's like the worst bald cap I've ever seen. I don't even know that I would have been able to identify bald caps in most movies in which there are bald caps. This is like, it's like a child on Halloween, that level of bald cap. I think I read somewhere that Mark Wahlberg actually shaved his head for this role to make the baldness look more convincing. And if that's true, I have to say, Mark, you did that for no reason. You shouldn't have done that because it still looked terrible. First of all, it's uncannily smooth. Like you can see on his forehead, there's, when he emotes and raises his eyebrows and stuff, there's his real forehead where you can see the wrinkles forming, and then the wrinkles just stop around here, and it's clearly just a smooth, discolored bald cap. And also, even worse, it's just very obvious where his hair is under the bald cap. It's like darker than the rest of it. The bald cap is like a little translucent, and it's just very clearly a patch of dark hair underneath this rubber or latex or whatever. And it's like, could they not have just like airbrushed it a little or put some foundation on it? Anything just to make it a higher opacity would have solved a lot of the problem. So in basically any shot of Mark Wahlberg that's somewhat close up, all you can pay attention to is the bald cap. But then in addition to that, all of the other practical effects they're using, just like kind of basic wound prosthetics, look really bad. And I normally wouldn't be so like brazenly judgmental about this on a personal level. I mean, maybe I would. But the reason I feel comfortable being really nitpicky about this is because, you know, I have a film degree and there are a lot of things that I feel like my film degree did not give me adequate experience in. But one thing I actually did a lot of in my film school experience was basic wound prosthetics. That's something I did a lot of in my last year of college. And not to brag or anything, but some of these really basic prosthetic wound techniques are really pretty simple and also inexpensive, I would say. Like it's just a matter of like liquid latex and cotton balls. And so, for example, Michelle Dockery's character has this wound on her cheek for much of the movie. It's like she's been punched in the face, so she has this sort of goose egg, like big swollen lump with a little cut in it for most of the movie. And again, there are a lot of close-ups, so you see it very prominently. It's right on her cheekbone. And it's so obviously just like a big lump of, you know, scar wax or latex or something. It's like not blended in properly to her face, color-wise or texture-wise. It just looks really bad. It looks like it's from a student film or maybe even like a play where people are anticipating the audience sitting sitting several feet back from the actual performer. There's also this moment where Mark Wahlberg, you know, he's crazy and evil, so at one point he like breaks his own hand to get out of handcuffs that our characters have put him in. So he like breaks his thumb, and then he starts getting his hand out of this handcuff, and it's like peeling the skin off his arm. It's degloving him, and it's supposed to be very gross and cringeworthy. But the skin peeling off is so clearly just like one layer of liquid latex. And the reason I bring that up is like one layer of liquid latex, it's very, very thin and rubbery. It just doesn't look like skin at all. It looks like a single layer of liquid latex. And so I'm sorry if it seems like I'm being nitpicky. I'm going to bring up, I don't know why I made this my first category. I'm going to bring up much bigger problems after this. But this was like one of the most glaringly apparent parts of the movie that felt really, really low effort. Not only because these types of effect are really not that expensive in my experience, like they're not terribly expensive to produce, but also because, in my opinion, they don't even require that much skill to produce well. So it just feels like a major, major sign of low effort on everyone's part. But my next category is acting. I don't have that much to say about the acting. I just want to say it's not very convincing. Mark Wahlberg is giving quite a wild performance. He's got this Southern accent at first that turns out to be just his character putting on a Southern accent.
Y'all need a pilot?
So then he goes back into like East Coast Marky Mark kind of voice, and I don't know, it's just a lot.
Moretti's very disappointed in you, Winston, and he wants you dead.
I guess it wasn't necessarily bad. I appreciate him putting so much effort into it, I guess. Topher Grace was really the funny standout performance in this to me. He's kind of giving like, his character is supposed to be very kind of geeky and embarrassing and kind of a loser, and his performance is kind of middle school play-esque, I would say.
I pissed myself.
Like, you know, the goofy guy in your class who gets cast in kind of a goofy role and really hams it up. That was kind of what Topher Grace was doing. To his credit, he does better in a part where he has to be a little more dramatic. There's a scene later on when like he's been stabbed and he thinks he might die, and he delivers a monologue that's not too bad. And it was actually, I thought, one of the most unironically good parts of the movie, where, you know, you're actually feeling something a little bit. My next category is toilet humor. Yes, this movie has a shocking amount of jokes about peeing and or pooping in one's pants. Truly, from start to finish, there are just so many jokes about peeing in your pants or pooping in your pants. It's honestly very weird to me.
These guys literally scared the shit out of me. What do you expect?
In the very opening scene, there's this thing of like Topher Grace gets ambushed by cops, and he gets arrested, and then he's like, I have to go to the bathroom. You scared the crap out of me. And it's like, okay. But then they just keep doing similar jokes to that. When they have their first real altercation with Mark Wahlberg in the plane, once they subdue him, Topher Grace is like, I pissed myself.
I pissed myself.
You know, he gets up to the front of the plane, and Michelle Dockery's like, you're not gonna piss yourself again, are you? And he's like, no, I'm all out of piss. And it's like, okay, there's a lot of piss talk, I'm noticing.
You piss yourself again, I'm sending you back.
That's all right, I'm empty.
Then later, some scary thing happens on the plane, and Mark Wahlberg, who's like tied up at this point, is like, I just pooped in my pants.
I don't know about you, but I just made a Jackson Pollock in my pants.
And it's like, okay, I feel like there's been a lot of this.
Did you make a poop?
It's just like, I'm not above some juvenile humor, but in this case, it's like there's so much pee and poop talk specifically that at a certain point you're like, this is kind of weird, right? Why is this such a huge recurring motif in this movie? So yeah, I found it odd that in this movie, ostensibly for adults, there was so much reliance on toilet humor. There are also a few weird moments concerning like rape as a topic, including one moment where they make like a rape joke that I thought was really weird.
It is way worse getting raped by both guys.
No one's raping you!
And then like throughout the movie, there's this running thing of Mark Wahlberg like threatening both Michelle Dockery and Topher Grace with sexual violence. And like, I get it. I get that he's evil, and I guess that's an evil thing to do, but it just seemed like a weird thing to keep coming up without ever really like going anywhere or being related to anything deeper in the movie. My next category is called Nothing Makes Any Sense. Okay, there's this ridiculous moment, probably one of my favorite moments in the movie, where Michelle and Topher, I don't remember what their characters were named, our two main characters have subdued Mark Wahlberg. They've like had a big altercation with him, but they managed to like tase him a bunch of times, and they've got him unconscious in the back in handcuffs or whatever. And now Michelle Dockery is flying the plane, and she's like, how are we going to do this? We need to make contact with someone who can walk us through it. So she tries contacting someone through Mark Wahlberg's radio that he has, but the signal's really weak, and she does manage to get in contact with someone and tell him the situation, but then she loses the signal. And Topher Grace says to her, well, you know, he heard our situation, so maybe he'll at least call it in. And Michelle is like, wait, what did you say?
He'll call it in, right?
Wait, what did you say?
Topher's like, oh, I said, you know, maybe he'll call it in. And Michelle Dockery is like, call it in? Oh my God, I've had my cell phone this entire time.
Right, the pilot guy? He's gonna call it in. What?
Yeah, apparently she's had her cell phone the whole time and she never thought to contact anyone before now. I know, maybe you're thinking, well, they're in like the mountains of Alaska, maybe there's no signal. Well, she immediately is like, oh yeah, it's a satellite phone. I can get service wherever. So I just thought it was this really ridiculous moment of revealing that your character has had a working phone for the entire movie up to this point and just forgot. And in fact, had to be reminded through like the stupidest way possible. She had to hear another character say the word call out loud to remember that she could call people. I just feel like even in some of the most bottom of the barrel horror and thriller movies, you typically have some kind of explanation for why a character can't just call someone. You know, there's no service, or like I dropped my phone, or somebody stepped on it and it broke. But in this movie, they don't even bother thinking up any obstacles like that. They just have a character forget that she has it until she hears the word call. Amazing. Another weird thing is that Mark Wahlberg, our alleged star, is honestly barely in this movie. He spends, and I'm not kidding, probably like 75% of the runtime incapacitated, unconscious in the back of the plane. You know, we have our first act where Mark Wahlberg is just the pilot of the plane, and then Michelle Dockery and Topher Grace slowly realize that he's not who he says he is, and he realizes that they've realized that. So they get into a fight. She pulls a gun on him. He wrestles the gun away. She gets the gun out of his hand. He has a knife. They're really struggling for a while. He like knocks her out, but she eventually wakes up and is able to tase him a bunch of times, and then he's incapacitated, so she and Topher Grace like tie him up, put him in the back of the plane. And then, I swear, like 30 minutes pass of the movie, like a really long time goes by with him just in the back of the plane, in handcuffs, incapacitated. And like, yeah, there are times where he'll talk to the main characters a little, or there's a point where he like riles up Michelle Dockery's character, but for the most part, he's just back there doing nothing. And most of the drama, if you can call it that, is just Michelle Dockery being on the phone with various people trying to figure out this situation. So I feel like that's just an odd trait for an alleged thriller movie to have. And then eventually in the movie, when this 30 minutes or so is up, Mark Wahlberg manages to get untied. You know, he gets a thing to cut his binds off, and he starts fighting with them again. And they eventually manage to incapacitate him again. They knock him out. I think Michelle Dockery like shoots him with a flare gun. And so they put him in the back of the plane, and he is incapacitated in the back of the plane, unconscious again. And even more time gets to pass just with Mark Wahlberg not even as a threat at all. And then even in the very final stretch of the story, what's really strange is, you know, Michelle Dockery's trying to land the plane, and Mark Wahlberg kind of gets up again, and you're like, okay, yeah, final struggle with the bad guy. And then she just shoots him a bunch of times, and he's out again. You know, he's not in it anymore. And she lands the plane. And, you know, some other stuff does happen. He ends up getting thrown from the plane. There is a really funny sequence of him getting thrown out of the plane as it's landing, and then him getting like squashed by an ambulance or a fire truck that runs into him. I did enjoy that. But it's just really weird because I feel like it's just such a no-brainer in a thriller like this for like that last most intense moment when she's landing the plane. You need to have that moment where like he gets up again, they're in like a really close hand-to-hand struggle as she's landing the plane. You know, you need that final moment until she can like right at the last minute manage to knock him away and like kick him out of the plane. You know, you need something a little more threatening, a little more up close and personal. As it happens in the movie, it just feels like Mark Wahlberg is never that big of a threat. And I think it's really weird that he's straight up not even doing anything for honestly like 3/4 of the movie. There's a part where they find like a folder belonging to Mark Wahlberg, and it's just full of full color printed out photos of all his evil deeds and like the people he's going after. And I thought that was a really funny detail. Like, why would he bother to do that? Oh my God, a really weird thread in this movie is that at one point, Michelle Dockery, you know, when she finally remembers she has a phone and calls her workplace, she gets them to find a pilot for her who can talk her through flying and landing the plane through the phone. And so she gets connected with this guy named Hassan, who is on the line and is a pilot and will help her land. And literally instantly, once he's on the phone with her, this guy starts flirting so aggressively with her.
120 at 3,000, roger. And what are you doing after this?
Like, as soon as he starts talking to her, he's like, and also, will you go to dinner with me tonight?
You want to have dinner with me?
Yeah, if you insist. I mean, we should probably focus on landing first.
Now, I could see this being like a funny little moment of like, whoa, I can't believe he's doing this in this harrowing situation. Keep in mind, she has like just finished fighting off Mark Wahlberg and getting him in the back, and she's really freaked out. You know, this is a harrowing situation. This guy starts flirting with her, and I could see it being like, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing that. But no, her reaction is to just kind of giggle.
Your bang, though, seems only fair since you asked me.
Of course. Fair's fair.
Like, she's into it. She's okay with it. She's like, oh, this is so charming. It was just the most bizarre thing. Like, in no world, it's one of those moments where you just instantly recognize like, oh, this was written and directed by men. Yeah. If I had just fought off evil serial killer Mark Wahlberg and I was trying to fly and land a plane for the first time, and the person on the phone who's supposed to be helping me with that started trying to date me and flirt with me, I would just like nosedive that plane right into the mountains. Like, we're all going down. But yeah, this continues throughout the movie, and he keeps aggressively flirting with her and she keeps being into it. And it was so weird that I actually became convinced that he was going to turn out to be a twist villain or something who's in on it, because at least that would a little bit explain why his behavior was so weird. And there are a few different like twist villains in this movie that we find out about over the phone. We never get to see them on the ground. It's kind of funny. So I really thought like maybe the weird pilot is actually in on it and he's evil. But no, it turns out he was just normal. She even sees him when she lands the plane and she gets on the ground. He's there and, you know, he is handsome. And she's like, wow, it's Hassan. I don't think he has a single line of dialogue once she's on the ground, though, I will say. So it's just a really weird thing that's in the movie for no reason, I would say. And then, speaking of once she lands, there's the resolution. The resolution of the movie is extremely weird. Throughout the movie, this thing has been happening where she's a U.S. Marshal, so she works for the U.S. Marshals, and she's realized through whatever, this situation with Mark Wahlberg, that somebody in the US Marshals is in on it, like in on the big evil guy of the movie's plan. At first, she suspects that it's like her friend coworker that she's been on the phone with for most of the movie. And so she takes it to their boss, still over the phone. She takes it to their boss, who's like some old guy. And she's like, I think it's this girl. And he's like, okay, I'll check it out. And then she realizes through some other information that it's actually the boss, not the friend. So she's both sold out her friend and revealed her hand to her boss, who is actually the evil guy. I'm sorry if that sounds convoluted. It was convoluted in the movie too. But anyway, once she finally lands the plane, you're like, well, how is this all gonna shake out? Like, she's landed the plane, Mark Wahlberg is dead, but she still has this boss, presumably like high-ranking government official if he's like the head of the US Marshals, and he's evil and nobody else knows except for her. So how is this going to get resolved? Basically, she gets on the ground. There are all these EMTs there, right? Like all the fire trucks and ambulances have shown up to attend to this situation of this rogue plane. And she spots one of the EMTs looking kind of shifty, I guess, and getting into the ambulance with Topher Grace. Topher Grace has been stabbed at this point. So she's about to talk to Hassan, the creepy pilot, but instead she runs over to this ambulance and she opens the doors, and the shifty looking EMT is strangling Topher Grace with a plastic bag. So she just shoots the guy a bunch of times and kills him and saves Topher Grace. And it turns out the EMT guy was on the phone with his boss, who turns out to be Michelle Dockery's boss, the evil, in-on-it U.S. Marshal guy. So she picks up the phone and she's like, "You're finished," or, you know, whatever she says.
No, Director Coleridge, it's not done. You are.
And then the movie just ends, like a second after that. So I guess all she needed to do to take down this man on the inside was to just kill his one hired goon, and that's it. Overall, it's just very weirdly structured. Like I said, it's weird that the villain Mark Wahlberg is in it so little. It's weird that so much of the plot happens off screen over the phone. And it's weird that so many of the beats that are supposed to have like the most drama or the most action or disaster are so devoid of it. It's weird that the stakes are so low and inconsistent at so many points. I can actually imagine a version of this movie working. It actually reminds me a lot of the type of movie that would have gotten made in like the 70s or 80s. I feel like there was a period where this sort of like stripped down little tight thriller was really popular in Hollywood. And I feel like it could really work if you did it with like a competent director and just had a really kind of simple, strong premise of like a few characters that were really well defined villain. It had me thinking of movies like that movie Duel, which was an early Steven Spielberg, I think a television movie about this truck driver who just starts like relentlessly pursuing a motorist for some reason. And I haven't seen that one in a really long time, but I believe like we barely even see the villain. It's just like this almost phantom of a villain that inexplicably just won't leave our protagonist alone. And there's something really scary about that, like being trapped in a situation with someone who's just intent on terrorizing you for no reason. I was also thinking of the movie The Hitcher, which is kind of a similar thing of deranged serial killer hitchhiker, just for some reason has set his sights on our normal, relatable protagonist and just won't leave him alone no matter what he does or how far he runs. So I feel like that's what you would have needed to make a movie like this work. You just need like a really strong villain who's like a shark, who just like won't go down, won't stop trying to kill the protagonist. But like I said, most of this movie is just Mark Wahlberg chained up in the back of a plane. He's so not enough of a threat to make this work. We never get that much insight into our sympathetic characters, Michelle Dockery and Topher Grace. And like I said, it totally misses opportunities like in that final struggle. There's not really a final struggle. She just easily defeats Mark Wahlberg and lands the plane. It's just missing a lot of the really basic building blocks you would expect from something like this. But enough about the big problems with the movie. My next category is funny dialogue. Okay, Mark Wahlberg throughout the movie keeps calling Topher Grace Twig. I don't really know why. Like, I don't know if it's implying that Topher Grace is like skinny in an embarrassing way, or if it's supposed to have some greater context that the movie didn't tell me about, but he keeps calling him Twig. And for most of the movie, partly because of the ridiculous voice Mark Wahlberg is putting on, I swear I thought he was just calling Topher Grace a twink.
You know what the difference between me and you is, Twig?
I thought throughout the movie he was just like, "Yeah, you twink."
You get it, Twig?
And in the moment I was like, well, that's a little odd for a movie like this, but you know, I guess he's evil. He's being homophobic to Topher Grace. But no, he was calling him Twig, and I just think that was kind of a misguided choice, partly because it sounds so much like twink, and partly because even if you do hear it as Twig, it just doesn't make a lot of sense or communicate anything.
You know what the difference between me and you is, Twig?
Oh my god, then when Michelle Dockery is on the phone with her work friend that she had accused of being the mole but actually isn't, she kind of reveals all that to her friend, and her friend is like, "Oh god, you set me up," but she kind of forgives her and kind of doesn't, and she ends the conversation by saying, like, "Girl, you know I love you, but thanks a lot, bitch."
And Madeline, you know I love you.
But thanks a lot, bitch.
Okay.
That was like the funniest line of dialogue in the entire movie. I loved that, genuinely. Just not what I was expecting her to say, honestly. And finally, the pièce de résistance. There's one last big thing to share about this movie. Some of you might already be aware of it and have been wondering why I haven't touched on it yet. And the reason is, I wasn't aware until the credits rolled, and I want to take you on that journey with me. So like I said, the movie has a super abrupt ending, the credits start to roll, and bam, directed by Mel Gibson. I can't even tell you how hard my friends and I started laughing. It was the perfect punchline to the joke that is the movie Flight Risk. It was like the final puzzle piece being put in the puzzle, you know? It made the whole picture make sense. We were like, oh, it was directed by an insane person. Yes, apparently this is the first movie he's directed since Hacksaw Ridge, which I remember this. I remember in 2016, there was this big conversation around like, oh, Mel Gibson has really had a comeback. You know, he was sort of soft blacklisted for a minute there in Hollywood, and now he's at the top of his game again. And there was a moment where, like, despite his long history of highly questionable statements and behavior, people were kind of pro Mel Gibson again. And I hadn't really thought about the way he's sort of faded back into obscurity after that. I mean, obscurity. He recently was in the news for some unfortunate reasons. But yeah, I looked into it, and apparently he's been attached to several projects over the years, but none of them have materialized until now. I have no idea why this came to be his next directorial venture. I don't want to speculate too much, but I wonder if the reason Mark Wahlberg starred in it is because they kind of both have a track record of crazy statements and actions and maybe are kind of buddies. Again, I don't know for sure. I guess Mel Gibson has some history with like the action genre, so maybe this just sounded fun to me. And to be fair, although this was like one of the worst scripts I've ever seen in a theatrically released movie, apparently it was a Blacklist script. The Blacklist is so funny to me, and I think this is a perfect example of why we can't always take it as a marker of like the best unproduced screenplays in Hollywood. If you don't know The Blacklist, I think I mentioned it maybe in my Holdovers plagiarism allegations video, but The Blacklist is like this list of the most coveted, most hot, unproduced screenplays of the year in Hollywood. And it is notably not curated by like critics or fellow filmmakers or writers. It is curated by studio executives. And I think that's a really relevant thing to remember when thinking about The Blacklist. Because it can be easy to think about it like, oh, The Blacklist, like that's such a prestigious list of screenplays. It must mean the best screenplays of the year. But really, it doesn't pertain to the best screenplays of the year. It is a list of the most marketable screenplays of the year, right? The screenplays that made executives the most excited. So I'm not saying there's never been any good stuff on The Blacklist. There has been plenty of good stuff, but in there's also some middling stuff, and there's a lot of, frankly, pretty bad movies that were Blacklist scripts. But this is a weird case because in this case, I struggle to see what would even seem particularly marketable about Flight Risk. Like, it's one thing for it not to be the greatest screenplay in the world, but normally you can look at that and be like, oh, well, I can see why executives would be excited about it. I don't really get why executives would have been excited about Flight Risk. I don't understand why this was a Blacklist screenplay. I guess it could have changed a lot in adaptation, maybe, or like maybe they were excited at the idea of this like high concept thriller. But again, is it really high concept if you like don't execute the concept really at all? Throughout the whole movie, I just had this recurring thought of like, how did this get funded? And isn't it depressing that there are so many creative people out there working on really good stuff who will never get their screenplays produced? And yet, Flight Risk was not only a produced script, but a Blacklist script, a coveted, rewarded screenplay. I can't think about stuff like that for too long, or I'll become very depressed. Anyway, I hope you liked this. I hope I'm able to salvage it in the edit. Unlike the movie Flight Risk, I was not planning on making this video until yesterday. I actually just shot a scripted Lifetime video the other day, so stay tuned for that. I guess if I get this out first, maybe that'll be for next month. Check out my Patreon, check out my 911 Rewatch podcast, and please, for the love of God, don't watch Flight Risk. Like, you can, but, you know, don't say I didn't warn you. Flight Risk? More like fail risk. Flight risk, more like flight miss. Flight risk, more like blight risk, because it's a blight on the face of cinema. Flight risk, more like flight wish I had seen something else. Flight risk, more like might miss this one when it comes to my town. Flight risk, more like light bisque, because I'd rather be eating soup than watching this movie.